as you can see, the topic I chose for my ISU was the national dream. And today I will be going over topics such as what it was, why it was made, who it affected, and how it changed Canada. To start, the national dream was the Conservative government's plan to have a railway going all across Canada, connecting all of its provinces. The main person behind the building of the railway was Sir John A. Macdonald, and seeing as he is basically the reason why the national dream exists, I'm going to talk a bit about him. Born on January 11th, 1815 in Glasgow, Scotland, Macdonald and his family lived there for several years until one of his father's failed business ventures left their family severely in debt. Macdonald's parents decided that it would be best to try and start a new life in Canada. So when Macdonald was at the mere age of 5, he and his family moved to Kingston, Ontario, Canada. His parents worked up enough money to send him to the Midland District Grammar School in Kingston, where he studied there until he reached the age of 15. After finishing grade school, Macdonald did not go on to college or university. Instead, he started doing law-associated jobs, slowly working his way up until eventually he became Canada's first Prime Minister. And you're probably wondering, when does the national dream come into the story? Well, during Macdonald's time in Parliament, he and the Conservative Party decided it would be highly necessary to have a railway that connects one side of the country to the other, and without it, Canada would remain disjointed and weak. However, this dream could only be made possible if British Columbia would join the Union, for as of that moment in time, British Columbia had stayed loyal to Britain and had not yet become part of Canada. If Canada wanted to build this railway, their only option would have been to somehow make British Columbia join them. So, Canada made a negotiation with British Columbia that if they were to join Canada, they would have the railway linking them to the rest of the country. Many citizens of British Columbia did not like the idea of the railway because they were afraid the building of it would cause them to go bankrupt and lead them to fall into the hands of the U.S. Despite the citizens' worries, the leaders of British Columbia agreed to join. The plans to undergo the building of the railway were well on their way to being done when rumors of a scandal started to arise. The rumors were said to be that members of Sir John A. Macdonald's political party, including himself, were accepting election funds from shipping magnate Sir Hugh Allan, the man who was given the contract for the railway. And those rumors turned out to be true. After the scandal had been dealt with, Macdonald's reputation had been shattered, leaving him with no other choice than to resign, which meant the plans for the railway had come to a halt. After Macdonald resigned, the Liberal government leader Alexander Mackenzie was elected. Mackenzie did not believe a railway across Canada was as of most importance, so he decided to build merely 700 miles of the railway. British Columbia did not approve of what Mackenzie was doing. They were promised a railway across Canada, and they were not getting one. British Columbia threatened Mackenzie and the Liberal government by stating that they were going to leave the country, which left Canada in a panic. Macdonald realized the opportunity he had to campaign for the next election and jumped on it. He told Canadians he had come up with a new national policy and promised that if he were to be elected once again, he would build the Canadian Pacific Railway. And sure enough, when the next election came around, Macdonald and the Conservative Party were elected back into office. After 3 years of planning, the building of the railway proceeded on February 16, 1881. But this time, the contract was given to a man by the name of Donald Alexander Smith. His job was to oversee the work done on the railway. All of Canada was thrilled to hear that they would finally get the railway they wanted. Not only would it become more efficient to travel across Canada, but it would also bring in more people to the country and many more enormous benefits. A man by the name of Andrew Onderdock was given the job to be the main builder of the railway. He would bring the railway through terrains of land that were extraordinarily hard to build on. Eventually the work was getting too hard and he realized he needed more workers to continue. However, the government had set him on a low budget, which meant he would have to think of ways to continue in a budget-efficient way. He decided it would be best to hire Chinese men to help in the construction of the railway, and although many Canadians were against it, Andrew continued on to hire over 15,000 Chinese workers. Because of that, a royal commission on Chinese immigration was made, bringing MacDonald to court. MacDonald simply stated that either we hire them and we have the railway, or we don't hire them and we don't have the railway. And with that being said, the building of the railway was allowed to continue, and even more Chinese men were hired. The working conditions got so treacherous that many men would fall ill or die. From that came a saying, "For every mile of track laid, a Chinese man died." During the work on the railway, an estimation was made that 600 to 1,500 Chinese men died, maybe even more. A couple years after the beginning of the construction of the railway, the funding for it started to slow, yet the railway still needed to be finished. So the railway release bid was to be passed, which would grant $2.5 million towards the further construction of the railway. And after 4 long years of construction, it was finally finished being built on January 7th, 1885, 5 years ahead of schedule. The bottom left picture shows the last spike of the railway being hammered in by Donald A. Smith. The feedback of the railway was exceptional. Hundreds of thousands of Canadians were rejoicing at the finishing of the railway. During the First World War, the railway helped by transporting and billeting troops, building and supplying arms and munitions, handing out over $100 million in loans to the Allies, and more. During the Second World War and the Great Depression, the railway had financial difficulties at times but made it through. The railway also devoted much of its resources to the war effort, such as transporting troops and resources across the country. During that time, the railway had many famous visitors, the most famous of which being King George VI and his wife, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mum, during the 1939 Royal Tour of Canada. At this present time, January 2022, the Canadian Pacific Railway, also known as CP Rail, is still in use and is used on the daily by thousands of people. In 2022, the Canadian Pacific Railway made a total revenue of over $7.7 billion. Now, the railway doesn't just spread across Canada, but into the United States as well, reaching New York, Detroit, Chicago, and more. In conclusion, Sir John A. Macdonald's national dream has achieved great success over many years, connecting Canadians from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, and helps people to realize the vast beauty of our great country, Canada. And here are a bunch of links in case you're wondering where I got my information from.